COP27, the annual United Nations Conference on Climate Change, ended last week. After 2 weeks of debate, the conference went 36 hours overtime to finish the resolution. While the resolution that they passed at COP27 made some notable improvements, it didn't do nearly enough. Firstly, let's see what it accomplished. Most importantly, a loss and damage fund was finally set up to help developing nations adapt to and recover from the aspects of climate change that are already affecting them. Developing nations have contributed the least to climate change, yet they bear the brunt of its effects because they do not have the resources to combat it. The goal of this fund is to lessen this inequality. Not only is this fund not perfect, but its details haven't even been decided. COP27 set up a timeline for the details of the fund to be worked out over the next year, but that's just more time we'll wish we had back. Right now, it doesn't even specify which countries need to contribute and how much they need to contribute. While this fund is a great step, it's also necessary to remember that we shouldn't need it. As Chile's environment minister said after the resolution was passed, remember, we are talking about loss and damage because we failed to reduce emissions, so it's not really a reason to celebrate. Also, there is a question of whether this money will actually be paid. In 2009, an agreement was made that developed nations needed to pay $100 billion in climate financing to poorer nations by 2020. It's now 2022, and nowhere near that amount has been paid. While this fund is a step in the right direction, we'll see if it's all it's hyped up to be. Another good thing that came out of this conference is that the United States and China have agreed to restart talks between their countries about combating climate change. Given that these are the two largest fossil fuel users, it's great to see them at least discussing climate change. Another surprise from this conference is that the European Union, which had taken a stance against the Loss and Damage Fund, ended up supporting the resolution. This conference was not a total bust, but its negatives were very strong. Firstly, while there was language on the need to protect and restore nature to fight climate change and its impacts, in the final resolution, no specific actions were included. That being said, COP15 of the United Nations Conference on Biodiversity is this December in Canada. Hopefully, actions to protect nature will be included there. The biggest negative was that this conference did practically nothing to preserve the goal of keeping below 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming. 150 countries have now signed a pledge to reduce methane pollution, but this is not enough. The COP26 resolution said that nations must phase down coal, but there was no follow-through of this in the COP27 resolution. There is also no mention of a phase down of any other fossil fuels, and there is nothing about peaking global emissions by 2025, which the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change said is necessary to stay below 1.5 degrees of warming. If you add up the current promises of emissions reductions from each country, emissions will only fall around 10% by 2030, when a 45% reduction in emissions is necessary to keep warming below 1.5 degrees. All of this is to say that the inaction at this conference has made the 1.5 degree goal almost impossible. While it is still scientifically possible to stay below 1.5 degrees of warming, given how slowly global policy moves, it's becoming extremely unlikely. That being said, this is not a reason to give up hope. It's important to remember that 1.5 degrees of warming is not the threshold after which the planet explodes. 1.6 degrees of warming is better than 1.7, which is better than 1.8. Everything we do to reduce the impacts of climate change matters, so we must keep fighting to make sure we don't reach 3 or 4 degrees of warming. Time and time again, these conferences have not accomplished anywhere near what they set out to. This conference was worse than many others since the fossil fuel industry sent 636 delegates to the very conference that needs to regulate the fossil fuel industry. Additionally, many environmental activists were silenced by the Egyptian government in the lead up to and during this summit. Furthermore, the conference itself was sponsored by Coca-Cola, the world's largest plastic polluter. All of this, alongside politicians doing the bare minimum to be able to say they did something, ensures that these conferences are underwhelming. If we want successful climate summits, we need to elect politicians who actually care about humanity and the threats facing our planet, instead of ones who break the weak promises that they make. But we don't have time to wait around for more elections. In the meantime, We need to pressure those currently in charge to do more. Please show up to protests, volunteer when you can, and more to try and make a difference in this fight. As always, I've linked all of my sources in the description below, and so I recommend reading through those if you want a deeper understanding.